Good evening, and we are live. This is season 2, conversation number 16. And we have Swarupa TK as our guest today. These conversations are brought to you by the Vivekananda Institute for Leadership Development, or the Vivekananda Institute for Leadership, Education and Development, which is a unit of the Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement. These conversations hope to bring speakers and people from a wide range of backgrounds, spanning, and we've been talking about topics spanning development, culture, heritage, history, leadership, and all of those things. And today we will be talking about the National Rural Livelihood Mission, as also uh, what constitutes livelihood at all. We'll explore that a little bit, while also we'll also explore a little bit of Swarupa's journey herself in terms of why, how, and she chose something like this and what she's been doing. So that is the purpose of that. Before I start the conversation, I'll also introduce you, Swarupa, to all of you. Swarupa is experienced and an accomplished comprehensive solutions provider with over 2 decades of experience spanning strategy, policy, decision-making, and implementation in the government sector, and also spanning sectors like the industry, commerce, information technology, rural development, handlooms and textiles, skill development, enterprise, and livelihoods. She's had a brilliant academic career, credentials that she has in the academic space, and she's always been a peak performer, providing strategic direction to various functions like social development, policy and promotion, investment mobilization, innovation and startups, industrial infrastructure, and development, trade promotion, and exports. Some of her key projects, I was looking at some of them, I picked 3, the Bangalore-Mumbai Economic Corridor, the Chennai-Bangalore Industrial Corridor, and Mukhya Vahini, the Chief Minister's Information System, to name just a few. She completed her MTech from IIT Delhi and is pursuing a PhD. Swarupa, an absolute pleasure and privilege to have you as our guest today.
Thank you.
So let me start with the question that should be on most people's mind, uppermost of most people. What is an IITian doing in the government sector after and shunning the glamorous corporate world?
Good questions. Government needs people like me in the service, right? You need
I'm not disputing that.
Talent.
Yeah, but I'm just curious.
No, but the expectation from government, the expectation of the common man from government is absolute, high quality performance. So I think IITians have to be in the government and they have to contribute both technically and administratively. It's a good place to be. And the width of challenges that one sees, width and depth in government, you don't see it anywhere else. And also, if you are interested in bettering the lives of fellow countrymen and, social service and that kind of thing, this is the right place to be.
Okay, but did you toy at all with the idea of pursuing something in the corporate sector, or was it always the government sector that you interested in?
No, actually, my interest was in research.
Mm-hmm.
That is why I'm pursuing PhD at this point in time, because I really wanted to do this. And in fact, I joined IIT at that time for an integrated course. But due to various personal reasons, I had to come back and join the government service. And my father was very instrumental in this.
So we talk about livelihood, but I'm very interested to know what constitutes livelihood in your own way of defining it. How is it defined by the government? And the question I ask is because should we not be looking at a more encompassing term? Because livelihood essentially means that you're giving somebody the fundamental essentials of leading life. Should we not talk about providing people more than just basic necessities of life? So how do you see livelihood itself, or provisioning for livelihood for people?
For government, through this scheme, what we look upon is to improve their income levels using local resources with an entrepreneurial spirit. So it is a self-driven, self-motivated activity using local resources, and the government will facilitate the process and support them in scaling up to their abilities. So the potential they have, we try to encourage that and help them, flower out in that sense, so that they are able to draw on government support. See, government through its various departments and a whole lot of schemes and programs is there everywhere. But that last mile connectivity, somehow people don't realize how to reach out to government. So therefore, there's a lot of gap in the awareness of what is available to a common man and how he should access it. So this last mile bit is where the National Rural Livelihood Mission has a role to play. So we bring together all the departments and provide that last mile connectivity through what is called a community cadre. We build a community cadre to function as a last mile connectivity of the government at the doorstep, in every village, in every household. And through this, we encourage them to have multiple livelihoods. It could be 3, it could be 4, it could be 5, and basically double their income levels from whatever is existing today. That is the program.
When you say multiple livelihoods, does it mean that they can pursue more than 1 or 2 jobs? Is that how you're seeing it, or entrepreneurial ventures? Is that what it means when you say multiple?
Yes, multiple livelihoods means that they can have their income in several methods, several means. Typically in a village, you will have people having, for example, cows. They can have, a dairy sector. They may have a farm, of a small piece of land. So they may be doing farming activities. So farming is one activity. Dairy is another. And maybe another member in the family who's not involved in these two may be doing a completely different activity. The person, maybe the eldest child, may be having a kirana store. So we are looking at in doubling the income of the household, not individual person, the household, so that there is a basic social net, and they're able to achieve their aspirations and grow in life.
So, okay, you talked about income, but one of the things that I don't know if this is correct, and you're free to disagree and correct me if I'm wrong. But maybe it's an older report, but one of the reports that I seem to read suggested that that rural livelihood missions, and particularly the NRLM for that matter, tend to spur and enhance empowerment of women. With the primary focus on women and the marginalized and all of that. But they somehow have not had an impact on income, and more specifically the quality of life. But when I heard you say this, so I don't see. Could you unpack what is the disconnect here between what the reports seem to suggest? When they say income, are they looking at a larger kind of? Are they comparing it against something else, or is that what is it that we are?
This report that you mentioned, I think the context in which we work. We use women power and group power. So we strategically use these two to improve the income levels in the rural areas. Right. So what we do is we bring about institution building, we bring about SHGs, we build them, and we can bring them under federations, and we empower the federations. We are aiming at social inclusion, financial inclusion, and economic inclusion. And through this, we try to bring in a participatory democracy. It is a demand-driven program. So we want to, encourage people to, it is not like there is a scheme, you take it. It's not like we give it to them. We want them, we create the hunger for it. They learn from each other. They learn from the other groups that are there in other parts of the state. We even take them to the other states. We see how they are performing, how people are, making a difference for themselves by making use of this. This is not a new package scheme. Whatever government schemes are there, we are only taking that to the doorstep. And we do that by using women power and group power. So yes, you see, women socially are conditioned in a certain way. They have a lot of limitations and boundaries. The urban women are different, but not the rural women. There are a lot of things that many things are not even imaginable. That kind of situation they are in. Now, if they have to, in addition, they have to take care of the family, the whole lot of, the work at home, whether even the fields, it is women who play an active role, whether it is dairy at home or the farming in the field, all this, the women play a big role. So she's already burdened with all this, plus the children, plus the in-laws. There's so many things that she does. Now she has to overcome all that and create space for herself and go to a place where she's able to look at multiple livelihoods, see the world, get better exposure, and aspire and grow also. Bring that also into action. Now, this is likely to take time, especially in the phase of we do a whole lot of programs in gender sensitization, FNHW, what we call hygiene and sanitation and wash programs. So we need to see these are basic things that help to set up a foundation. Once the foundation is set up, then she is able to think beyond survival. So first of all, she should have basic health, nutrition, and only then she will be able to think beyond that. Can she do something to better her own life? So first, so we need to build from the very, very basic. So our activity covers each one of those activities also. So we also ensure that she's under insurance coverage. There are pension schemes are availed. So as I said, every government program that is available today, we try to take that to the doorstep of the household in a village. So this is it's a time, it's not a, I mean, we are set up as a mission mode so as to bring about a change in terms of some specific timelines, but it doesn't always happen. Reality is far from our ideal planning roadmaps. So it takes time. We are 10 years old now in the government, and 10 years ago, this particular organization was set up. There has been a lot of difference. There is still a long way to go.
So, could you share some of the typical experiences that you've had? For example, you say that you take it to the doorsteps. So, many of the programs that we run, some of the programs that you mentioned are programs that our organization also associates with. For example, the SHGs or the WASH program and all of that. And I can straight away imagine the challenges that come from taking such programs to the doorsteps or trying to encourage, because it's not just about telling women to come and start playing a role. It's about educating the entire family. It's about educating communities and all of those things. So could you share some experiences of how you've been able to manage this, and what are the typical challenges that come in the way of achieving some of these goals?
You're very true, very right. It's educating the woman is not enough. You have to educate her family too, because she needs to come out of that, without antagonizing any of them, to be able to make space for herself, and in addition, add on to the family work that she's already doing. So this takes a lot of effort. Like I can say, we have this BC Sakhi program that we have done. Now, BC Sakhi is a community cadre for financial services. Now, we have trained these people, selected them as from the members of the SHG, and we have given them a POS machine. So they are supposed to give the government related financial transaction they enable by going door to door. So wherever, elderly people are at home, they are handicapped, they are sick, and they need their pension, she is able to visit the house and give the money to them at the doorstep. Now, the NREGA works are happening. So the payment of the labor payment, she is able to draw the money and give it to them in their houses. So what tremendous change has been brought about by this kind of single activity that she has done, she has undertaken. Like, for example, we had a discussion, a conversation with these 10 of the top performing BC Sakhi. I think the top 10 have already done a turnover of more than 2-3 crores. So we were having a conversation with them to understand what challenges they are facing. And there was this particularly the lady from Ballari, and she said earlier she was being her house was being referred to as, you know, her, she mentioned her husband's name, Aur Mane, and now it's like Madam Aur Mane, DG Madam Aur Mane, DG Pesaki. They call her DG Pesaki. So DG Madam Aur Mane. So that has brought a lot of smile on her face, and she feels importance in the village. And now people are listening to her. Her family also is listening to her. This has brought about a lot of change. But and like this, we create a whole cadre of you know, community people who are able to contribute to some extent technically also in the field as their first line of defense for the government programs. So this, I think, you know,
These are women that you take into your fold and then train them to be the
yes,
person, right?
yes, we
You-
work with women in the SECC data, and they're all BPL families. So you see, they are already challenged. They won't have education. We do have people with some, you know, degrees, graduates are there, but most of them are, you know, probably 10th SSLC level only. So we take these kind of people and we train them in various programs, whether, you know, as local community cadre persons or master bookkeepers or DGP Saki, Krishi Saki, Pashu Saki. We train them in convergence with the relevant departments, line departments, so respective departments, so that they are able to be the connect of that particular department in the village.
Okay.
And there was this one more instance that I would like to share. This particular lady, I think this happened in some village in Chitraduga. So she lost her husband. And before the funeral was done, her family told her to vacate the house, her husband's brother or so. And so she was lost and she was crying and she was there. And so one of the other women who had come to see her, she happens to be part of the SHG group. So they informed the SHG other women and they all joined together and sat there and they fought for her rights for that house. Now this was a long fight. It took 3 days, I think 2 days. The police were called, the district administration prevailed upon her, the local MLA prevailed upon her. But you know, they stood their ground and said, you will not vacate her just because her husband is dead. She cannot be thrown out of that house. So until, I mean, they assured her, okay, we'll finish the rights and afterwards we will see. That kind of thing they came up with. But you know, the women did not permit it. And finally, after they gave it to her in writing that they will not throw her out, she was able to, the funeral was completed and now she's happily staying there. And she's a very active member in the SHG group and contributing in a big way to the enterprises of the SHGs there. So these kind of instances we have come across the state. Some really interesting instances where women felt, you know, after joining the SHG group and federations and working with us, they have felt very, totally empowered. In fact, the last Gram Panchayat elections, I think 28% of the, you know, many of the community cadre who were trained by us stood for elections for Gram Panchayat members. And almost 28% of them, of the total Gram Panchayat members elected, and 50% of whoever from our community contested have won the elections and have become members today in the Gram Panchayat. So from coming from a BPL family where they were not able to articulate their, you know, their difficulties, their challenges, today they are Gram Panchayat members and, you know, taking active role in the improvement of their villages. That's a long journey and speaks a lot for the effort that Sanjeevani has put in. It is 10 years, but then it has taken that kind of time to come to this stage. And that I think is a, you know, achievement for social inclusion that the organization has brought about.
Absolutely. I think when you talk of women panchayat members, particularly, I think these are women who have already, you know, when you say they're empowered in the sense that they're already they stood because they had created the kind of this one for themselves. as opposed to some men who would put their wives in front and make them the panchayat members when they actually run the entire show. So we have that as well. But I'm obviously clear that here you already have these are women who are trained to who know how to handle themselves, and therefore I. So what has been the experience, particularly with these women who have taken over these roles of authority in one sense? How have they been able to discharge their duties? Because obviously there are people who have seen some success, who have been empowered. So how has that played out? If you have any.
They are very, very happy, and I should say we have got good feedback, initial feedback. We have undertaken a study, a detailed study to know where exactly are they facing any challenges, and do we have to train them on those also. There has been very wide acceptance of these people in those gram panchayats, and they are very happy. They are happy to be part of the administration of government, and they feel nice to actually come to a government office from a sense of being in a position rather than being a SHG woman member. They're
Right.
happy to come and engage in conversations with the local politicians like the MLAs and all that. And they have been very warmly welcomed also, I should say. We have had one or two transgenders also in this, and that is really nice. Really, we are also very happy with the success of these people.
One of the other things that I wanted to touch upon is that, so when we talk of rural livelihoods, we seem to talk primarily about providing labor-intensive opportunities. That's and do you also think we could graduate to a point where intellectual capital, that kind of, do you feel that is difficult because of the lack of access, particularly in rural areas, and is that something that?
No, not really. See, when I said this is, we try to inculcate a sense of entrepreneurial spirit. We are looking at whether it is a farm livelihood, mushroom cultivation, or the organic farming that we encourage, or even a vermicompost pit that we support. Well, we work with all these activities through convergence with other departments. We look at every activity as an enterprise, something that has to have a business model and give them, they have to see the money at the end of the day. And we train them accordingly for that. Yes, we work with women with an entrepreneurial mindset, to inculcate that mindset in them. But we also run a parallel program for the children of these women. In case they are educated, they need skilling for industrial units nearby their villages. So in one way, we are trying to see that the migration to the cities are reduced by ensuring that they make use of the local opportunities. And having said that, we also ensure that opportunities are created locally. So we have a lot of activities in non-farm sector, in value chain development. We assist in making the FPOs and making producer enterprises also out of that, and we help support in branding and marketing. We tie up with all the agri startups in Bangalore. We had one company who's in conversation with us to ensure the rural logistics. So a whole lot of startups today who are in Bangalore are not only in IT, they are using IT as a tool to ensure, to work in other sectors. It could be agriculture, it could be logistics. So they are finding their markets outside urban areas as well. And we are trying to connect them so that, there is, these startups here also have good business opportunities in the rural areas. In fact, the rural area, the opportunities are very vast and very wide. So we are bringing about the connect as well.
So when you look at when you talk of opportunities in the rural areas, particularly when you spoke about providing some sort of opportunities for the children of these women. So what sort of opportunities and what sort of training or capacity building would that include? In addition to what we've spoken about in terms of particularly because one of the greatest difficulties that rural India seems to be facing, and one of the key issues of migration is the fact that most people cannot access what they want, be it education, be it the proper infrastructure, or be it funding, or even marketing support, credit, for example. I understand that SHGs and all of those things are there, but we still seem to be struggling with some of these things in the, particularly in the rural areas, which informs the migration debate in terms of why they start to move around and all of those things. You say you mentioned about how you've looked at reducing this migration to cities and all of that. Some experiences on this in terms of how this is shaped in some particular territories, or examples that you can cite for us.
We have another program which is called the TTKY program. In that program, we train. We work with private partners. They are the project implementing agencies, wherein we have had private companies, industries taking it up. For example, Shahi Exports. So they are, as an industrial unit, they are into ready-made garments, and they are located in several districts. Now they need 2,000 to 3,500 women workforce for their units. So they are imparting training under this program. So locally, we ensure that they get their people from the families of these SHGs, and they impart a training for their units. And they did, they train them and take them, select them for their own units. So like this, we have had some NGOs also, but the point is we are trying to motivate the industries that are located across the state to take up this activity so that they get their labor, manpower from the local areas itself. So that is one activity that we are one part of the program of Sanjeevani.
So one of the things I'm going to make a little segue into some aspects of your own journey in terms of how it's very interesting to note the span of work that you have engaged in. For example, when I look at the key projects, there is the Chennai Bangalore Industrial Corridor that you worked on, the Bangalore Mumbai Economic Corridor, then the business process re-engineering at BTPC, the Mukhya Vahini, Chief Minister's Information System. So how did all of this come about? How did you manage to work with some of the most key projects? What brought you into all of these things? And how has the journey been? Innovation, startups, incubation. There is hardly anything that you don't seem to have touched upon. It's like the entire span of things that somebody wants to do in a career, you seem to have done in about 20 years. How did that happen? And what is the secret to that, having worked in multiple areas?
Those are things that our department, the industrial department, and the have been working on. And I have been fortunate to have been on all of those projects, very interesting ones. We have had very good commissioners and principal secretaries who have taken very, very key important roles. See, Karnataka has always been the leader in terms of taking the initial steps in whatever sector. We were the first to come out with an industrial policy way back in 1982. We were the first to privatize our education sector. So these kind of initiatives Karnataka has taken all along. That's because we have had excellent support, political support, bureaucratic support. This has been possible. Like our Sir M. Visvesvaraya, the motto of our department is industrialize or perish. So we follow that very, very passionately we follow that. So we take these leads, whether it is the innovation, the department came out with an innovation policy and we were working on that, whether it is the GIs, whether industrial policy, even the IT policy, we were the first state to come out with. So all these initiatives have been from the department. Our department is a more than 100-year-old department. So there is that, department knowledge that we build upon, each one of us builds upon. And I have been very fortunate to have been in the right place at the right time. So I was able to work on all these things, whether it was the IT, bringing in IT in a big way in the state, or in fact, the IT corridor. I should say it is our department that is some other department that branched out to handlooms and textiles and separated out. In fact, the IT department also came about from the industries department. So each of these were able to build on the knowledge that was built in the department and branch out and become full-fledged as and when they, got to a certain inflection point, I should say. So yes, I have been fortunate that I've been at the right place at the right time and been able to be on all the key projects also.
Yeah, two projects that I was particularly, interested in talking to you about. One is the ease of doing business. So I was just trying to figure out what sort of a project that could be. I mean, I am assuming that one of the things that the government would do is to ensure that uh, corporates, or for that matter, any organization that wants to set up, the process of starting off something, or you know does not become so difficult that somebody who has an entrepreneurial flair for it gives up saying, I don't want to do this anymore, kind of a thing. So what constitutes ease of doing business? Because it's something that I'm very keen to understand. So what constitutes that, and what sort of a project was that?
See, typically we are running on legacy systems. Government acts and rules and all are pretty old. And whatever updation is there has been only tweaking to a certain level. So when the ease of doing business initiative was, taken up in a big way, it was taken up across the country. So we had to take a relook at our acts, at our processes, at what is it that this digitization and IT has brought about a huge revolution across every sector, now including the government. So government, from being agency driven, I would say, like the government would set the standards, would set the rules, and would decide what the common man wanted. From that, so it has been turned around to becoming citizen centric. So today, actually, we are trying to look at how to simplify things for the common man. Earlier, it was coming, ಮೇಲಿಂದ ಕೆಳಗೆ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇತ್ತು. Now the demand, what is happening? What do you want? That we are here to facilitate you. That kind of concept, mind opening is happening in government. And towards that only, this ease of doing business. See, we have such a lot of potential in the country. But if you look at global trade, we are nowhere in the, we are not visible at all. Like for Karnataka itself, we have the largest fruit production, largest vegetable production. I can give you a big list. We have largest roses, rose onions, and so many things. But what is the value addition that we are doing? How much of that is getting converted to, global trade? How much of exports is going? We are in the top five, the third position or fourth position. We keep varying there in this country, but that is hardly anything compared to what is being produced here. So we have to do better. So that is where we are, the whole country had to look at the processes with respect to the acts. Are we updated enough? So this is something that is ongoing. It is not something that will happen just, it's a time bound within 1 year, 2 years. It's not at all like that. So this ease of doing is an ongoing process. It is going on even now. And where we re-looked at how to simplify setting up businesses and how to run existing businesses. So in the process, we are looking at, there are so many registers and files, returns that you have to file, whether it is to the labor department or when you are starting a process, you take a consent for establishment, consent for operations. So multiple times you have to visit the same office again and again. Now, there is a certain reason why that was set up like that at whatever point of time it was set up. Today, maybe some of those reasons still exist. But some of them, I think we can tweak it or at least even simplify it. So while not doing away with the intent of the, the purpose of why those approvals are there, but also simplifying the whole thing for them. So earlier, if there were 20 steps, we try to bring it down to 5 steps, maybe 10 steps. Next time we take it up again, we bring it down to 5 steps. So this kind of ease of improving the methodology of the whole government procedures, government support that you get from government for a enterprise. That is what we were looking at in the ease of doing business. it's an ongoing process. It will keep happening. And I think there's always room for improvement and always scope for making things better in not only establishing a unit, but also running it. Establishing is still easier because it's in the beginning, one go. But then keeping it running because month on month, year on year, half monthly, half yearly, you have to keep filing reports. And if all that can be automated in some way, that is very, very helpful.
So in your opinion, you touched about this. Keeping a concern going is more difficult than starting it. And I myself, did float an entrepreneurial venture, if you say about 7-8 years ago, and it was not easy. Let me be quite honest about it. It wasn't even a big entrepreneurial venture. It was not easy because there was, for example, one of the things that we could not do. ನೀವು ಹೇಳ್ದಂಗೆ ಅದು ಮೇಲಿಂದಾನೆ ಬರಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದು ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೂ we really had to run from pillar to post, to be honest. And one of the things that we found challenging was the lack of answers to certain questions that we found. For example, we could not find what are the things that we want to do to build something. What are the things we want? What are the a checklist of things that we could quickly file and other things? How soon would you get a response to some kind of a report? These kind of things were not easily accessible online for us at that time. I'm sure things would have changed, but when you say that things have improved, what are the specific areas you think, and to what extent is digitization? Because obviously, if you go digital, one of the biggest advantages you get is you can reduce corruption significantly and reduce the process time that is required, and manual errors that can occur. So in your experience, in your thinking, what are the areas you think that have significantly changed in terms of ease of doing business, particularly in our state?
There has been a lot of initiatives and which are even sustaining. See, within government, we initiate a lot of IT related projects, but sustaining them also becomes a challenge with the key people getting transferred and funds not being made available at the right time. So even though everybody wants the change and there is a very urgent need to change things, there are a lot of reasons why it doesn't pan out the way we plan it out. It doesn't really pan out like that. So despite that, I would say for government itself, see, even departments used to work in silos. Forget the common man. Even for somebody within the government to know what is happening in another department, get some information from the other department is not easy. Even today, it's not easy. So getting access to all this, even my own department, if I want something, I can get it very easily now because of the digitization that is happening. There is still a long way to go. For example, if you look at Bhoomi, which has been going on for so many years, and initially when it started, like, it was amazing, it's such a long journey and a huge learning. Today, the IT systems are dated and they are having a second version coming out. They're working on it. But the fact that a farmer can get his RTC, in the village itself, it had so many challenges, getting those records online and ensuring that the farmer himself has access to his own records. And he gives it to the bank, he mortgages it for some loan, and it gets entered. It's not released. So he doesn't know whether he may have paid it. But the government system of releasing that mortgage from the land may take, there may be a time lag. It's not released. He cannot take another loan. All these kind of things have streamlined a lot of pain points. And all these have been addressed because of the digitization in government. Bhoomi is just one example. Now it's the same now in Khata transfers in urban areas as well. And registration of land titles and that as well. And so many places, it has simplified things for government also. Today, we are talking of giving this open access data network. We are working on that. All departments are committed to putting their data, raw data, out in the public domain for people to conduct research on it. Now, this has been possible because of the digitization efforts that is being driven in the state government across all departments.
Okay, so one of the projects that I saw, which is caught my eye, was the management information system that seems to be you seem to be putting up for the livelihood solution. So, what sort of a management information system? Is it a two-way kind of information system where you also get information data from the programs that are going in, and also the kind of initiatives? What sort of a MIS is this being planned?
Yeah, so you see, we are using the national livelihood program is run by the central government
Right.
from the Ministry of Rural Development. They have set up an MIS system and we input data in that system. Now, their system caters to whatever the central government's lookout is. Now, there is a difference in what the state government would like to access information in the same program. Like, for example, we would like to know how many of our households are SC/ST, how much of specific when it come to, let us say, a particular assembly area. Can we get data for a particular assembly area? How many livelihoods have been impacted? So we are not able to draw that kind of data from this existing MIS system. So currently we are working on having our own MIS system, which will fill in these gaps. And we'll probably port the data from the central government one, and the additional data we will have to input. Now, every component of this program, we are inputting through the community cadre using apps. Different apps are there, which is again initiated by central government. But we need to have our own system so that we can capture data that is relevant to us, what we want. Like how many times the livelihoods have multiplied. Did it actually go 3 times or 4 times? That data we are not able to capture. So there are several information gaps that we are addressing through our own MIS system.
Okay, I think there's one, it's not a question actually, it's a comment. I don't know if you're also seeing it. It says that ಗ್ರಾಮೀಣ ಅಭಿವೃದ್ಧಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಮಹಿಳೆಯ ಪಾತ್ರವು ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿದೆ. ಸ್ತ್ರೀ ಸಂಘಟನೆಗಳು ಸ್ವಾವಲಂಬನೆಯನ್ನು ಪಡೆಯಬೇಕಾಗಿದೆ. I think the unsaid question there is that we can set up all of these things, but are they really free to work in the way that they should be doing? Are they truly empowered and free? I think you would like to, is there something that you would like to comment about that?
Yeah, I would request the person who has posted that question to check out in their village and let us know, because that's a good feedback for us also. We also conduct these random checks to know that our program has an impact or not. How many have heard of our program and how many are actually being, participating in it. Because you see, we have to cover 28 lakh households in the state. And as on date, we have covered 25 lakh households. So we are looking at 3 more lakh, which we will cover this year. Then we need to know that we have actually impacted. I mean, that's a big number and somebody should be aware of what is happening. So kindly, I request a person to let, to find out from a woman to check and let us know there is an SHG in their village. And if somebody who's a member there, how much can she talk about Sanjeevani or how much she has empowered herself through this program? And that will be a testimony for us also.
There are several NGOs, including our own. We have that where we work on. You talked about the WASH program. We have extensive interventions in that area, both hard as well as soft training or infrastructure building and all of that, and also on the SHGs that you talk about. So what is the extent of government and civil society organization cooperations that you're looking at, and how do you, and clearly there are multiple synergies that can be built through cooperating there, because clearly civil society organizations, NGOs have a community connect that is deeply embedded, having worked in particular communities for a long time, and therefore would act as not just implementers and executors of government projects, but also as a great feeding system, as well as a collaborative kind of network partners and all of that. So what are your thoughts on that, and how do you think, if you think this is an area of engagement, how do you think this can be taken forward?
See, Karnataka's position today in the SHG movement is so strong and is among the top ranking states only because of the huge lead that Karnataka has got because of the civil society participation. The civil society has played a role here even before government woke up to it, I should say. Well, government, I just mentioned that we have led in many activities, but in the SHG movement, government did not lead. I should give that credit to NGOs like, Swami Vivekananda, your organization, and even the others in Mysore region. See, these activities that were set up by the NGOs, the civil society, has played a huge impact. The difference between that and government is government being government will support and sustaining it for a longer term. NGOs typically would do it for a certain objective and probably they would not want to leave them, but then that objective is served because it's a question of funding. The funds that they are able to access and run the programs. But for government, it's a commitment to bettering the citizens' life. So the funds question will, it should better not end, I would say. If I were to talk as a common man, the fund flow should always be there from the government. So that sustaining effort, sustaining channel can be played by the government. We use civil society, a lot of NGOs, you people have the technical expertise, you're able to specialize in specific sectors, whether it is farm, non-farm, social mobilization, or FNHW, specific sectors, and we draw on technical support from organizations like yours to help us run this program in the long run. So government is able to give the long-term commitment, but without the civil society, this will not happen. And it is basically a people's movement. We are trying to bring in participatory democracy. People that awareness has to be created, and we want to give a voice to these people that you have a right on these. These are your rights. You need to access them. You should know how to access them, which door to knock. Now that, I think the government and the civil society have to work together, and only then it is possible. Government is only the sustaining long-term partner. So it's a big role, and we draw upon civil society to take this forward with the technical expertise. And you see, the civil society is able to change to market needs. Government cannot change to that quickly. And we don't expect government to change every day, it should be stable. So whatever improvements have to come should come from the civil society, and government should learn from that, keep its stability, and add it and encourage this upward mobility for everyone. So I would say, yes, it's a huge role, and we have to work as partners in this. There is no, vendor kind of relationship. It is partners, equal footing, including the SHG woman, who is again on an equal footing with the government.
Right. And so how has been the experience, particularly during the last 2 years? We've had the COVID pandemic, and obviously it's caused a lot of displacement of communities, and also displacement of jobs and all of that. So how has been that experience, and how have you been able to manage to keep things moving, and what have been the serious challenges that have come your way, and how those have been handled?
Yeah, so you see, even the pandemic broke in initially in 95, masks were coming at what 25-30 rupees a mask, and there was scarcity. We didn't have that kind of mask, and it is at that time the SHG women moved into mask preparation, and in a big way. And that was for the first time the cost of the mask came down to 6 rupees and 10 rupees, 10 to 6 to 10 rupees. It came down because of the mask production that they were capable of. They came up with sanitization services, government buildings, all hospitals. That was being done through the SHG women groups. Then they have come up with canteens. They have mobilized free rations for the immigrants who were coming into the state as well as going out of the state on their way. So, a whole lot of work has been done by SHG women. They rose up to the occasion. And, what was interesting was they were the unlikely leaders. We never expected them to take it on themselves and take a lead in this. And they brought about they came in such numbers and they did such good work that we ourselves could not believe that these people could actually rise to the occasion, whether it was food, giving rations, or ensuring hygiene in terms of even the awareness creation. They were part of the entire government, the COVID warriors. There were two women in every activity at the village level. They created this awareness. They were part of the COVID warriors. And that was an amazing amount of work they have done. Some of the SHGs took up sanitation services as an enterprise activity. Many of the vehicle sanitation was being done through the SHG groups. So yes, we trained them during that time, although everyone got hit and their regular activity could not be carried out, but they were able to change over to these kind of activities that were relevant to the pandemic and take things forward. And secondly, I should say that the central government also has been very aware of this fact and has been pushing down the funds, making it available at the grassroots level, whether it is through bank linkage, ensuring the banks are able to open up their doors for making liquidity available in the villages for these people to continue with their entrepreneurial activities, whether it is that or giving what we call the community investment fund. It's a small fund that we give. Either that itself can be used as a loan and an activity can be started, or they can use that as a seed capital to draw larger sums from the banks. So central government is really pushing us to make maximum usage of that. And we have released almost 300 plus crores in this regard already in this year, this financial year. So yes, there is a lot of work happening, both from the government as well as from the SHG members towards the, managing the pandemic.
There's a question in the chat. It says, can private individuals volunteer to work with government programs?
There have been requests to take people as interns, although that kind of provisioning has not been made. We have been recruiting people in the districts in a big way, actually. And we had a lot of vacancies, and now all of that is filled. I think we are crossing probably 1,000 plus team members we are across the state now. So probably next, after this stabilizes, we may take on volunteers, because there's a lot of requests from colleges also to work as interns. So we may open up a little later, probably maybe next year, or after that we may look at it.
And if people want to apply to volunteer, how do they go about doing it?
As I said, we are still in the process of thinking how to onboard them. So probably next year we may have some more clarity on how to go about this.
And if I may ask, so what are your next plans? I mean, what are the things that you're working on towards as we approach almost the end of the conversation? So what is in the pipeline? What are the areas that you think you would be working in, and what are the areas that you want to?
We are conducting a lot of exhibitions right now for the SHG women. In fact, the Belgaum session, we are having one from 15th December to 20th December in Belgaum. We have created the, we are in the process of creating a brand identity for the SHG women products. We call it Asmite. And we have just started work on that. We will shortly be setting up a marketing organization exclusively for SHG products. We have onboarded many of these products on Amazon, and we're working with Flipkart also. And yesterday we have signed a MOU with Culture Street for our products there. You can see some of our leather work, which is, it is actually evolved from leather puppetry of ancient times. And it is from Chikbalapur SHG women. There are about 20 odd women are working on it. Now it's no longer puppetry, but nice, beautiful wall hangings are all there. So they are available on Culture Street. And a lot of these marketing initiatives has been our focus, one. Second, we are setting up a chain of what is called Vandan Vikas Kendras. Now, these are specifically for the tribal groups. The central government has this organization called TriFed, which is a tribal welfare organization. And they are funding this. They are working through us, through Sanjeevani, to set up the VDVKs. Basically, the forest produce will be brought into this center, and it's a and they will be processed and packaged and marketed from there. And those products are available on online also. TriFed has their commercial outlets also, and that we are setting up 100 of them across the state. We are also working on integrated clusters, farming clusters. We have identified 48 of them. So that also will be, we are working on right now. Then non-farm clusters, 4 of them are there. Our Prime Minister mentioned Chanpatna toys in one of his Mann Ki Baat, and that is a cluster that has been sanctioned. And we want to scale that to the level of exports. We have what is called another scheme, that is there's the Prime Minister's food processing scheme, PMFME, where agriculture products made by SHG women are given certain seed capital to scale up. We are working with CFTRI for the technology transfer. So there are a lot of activities that we have taken up this year, a lot of exciting things happening. And I want all of you all to participate, including civil society and all the SHG women, to actively participate in this and take the benefits of the scheme, especially the SHG women. Because you see, we are working with huge numbers, 25, 28 lakh numbers, and sending the message across to every one of them in itself is a huge challenge.
You're almost at the end. I also actually meant if you have any plans, personal plans as well, in terms of what you want to be doing. You want to continue with the NRLM, or is that, are there plans to, obviously, I don't know. I mean, so are there any personal goals, objectives that you have? While you answer that, I will next ask Sudarshan to round it off with this concluding remarks.
See, as part of I'm from the industrials department, and I have worked with all sizes of investments, micro, small, medium, large, mega power projects, including industrial corridors. I have worked with all of them now, and I have the industrial policy, the latest industrial policy also. I have been instrumental. I have penned it actually along with the consultants. Now, the one sector that I had not addressed was the informal enterprises. Now that comes under the livelihood. So that I truly believe in Sir M. Visvesvaraya's vision, industrialize or perish. To me, it is, we have to industrialize our Kannadigas, our local people of our state. We have to inculcate the entrepreneurial spirit in them, in their minds, so that they are able to set up enterprises, whether small, big, whatever size, whether it is service activity, export, doesn't matter. But they should have that ability of, typically we don't have that. Kannadigas are not entrepreneurial. So that I feel,
Even after Narayan Murthy and all of them, you're saying that?
You have those, stars far few and far between, and they are definitely role models to set up, create this IT revolution and making Bangalore a startup capital. That is full credit to them, definitely, yes. But the common man still doesn't really
have the. No, I quite agree. I just wanted to bring that. I quite agree.
We need more of more such Narayan Murthy, Kiran Majumdar,
Kannadigas, yeah, absolutely.
Yes, we need more of them. They are certainly role models to have created this innovation ecosystem here. And I hope that percolates further down, and every Kannadiga becomes entrepreneur, like your typical Gujarati, that kind of mindset.
That kind of mindset is a little difficult for the Kannadiga to get.
Not business, but enterprise, industry. I would like to see every Kannadiga think on those lines. So that is why I have joined this informal enterprises. I wanted to see what kind of support this, it's very different from your regular formal enterprise. So that is one missing gap in my repertoire of work. So to bring that about, I have come here. Yes, I'm enjoying the work here and I'm happy to be here. It's a great opportunity for me to work with grassroots level innovation and grassroots level enterprises.
There's been quite a lot of people who have said they
Yeah.
thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I'll just hand it over to Mr. Sudarshan now.
It has been really a wonderful conversation, Swarupa. And what I would, I would just read out the comments put up on the chat box, which summarizes exactly your, interest and your passion towards working in different sectors. And some of them liked your idea of collaboration of the government, the NGOs, and the civil society, along with the community, going to the grassroots. I think it is high time that all of us work in synergy, in synergistic participation. I always believe that we need to go to the community to really find out at this point of time, at this juncture, what do the skills and livelihood that they would really want. And I think NRLM has done considerable work on this. It would be very interesting to know more about I think what has emerged out of such a study. And the other remark is, of course, on the chat box, very informative talk. Really appreciate, look forward to more such talks, and congratulations, and wishing you more success. And the last but not the least, Bravo Swarupa. Yeah, that is a very good remark there. So the best wishes to Ms. Swarupa and SVYM. And yes, I think all in all, we look forward. I think the most predominant thing that should be on your mind is to visit SVYM. I sincerely hope that it will be a possibility in the near future. And I'm always waiting to see that you visit our initiatives and we get along together and start working together too. It has been a wonderful time having you in our conversation, Ms. Swarupa, and of course, it has been you've really put up a lot of points to ponder, thoughts coming out of different ways of which the government as well as the NGOs can collaborate together and take things on. And as we move on, and from all of us here at Vivekananda Institute for Leadership Development, we thank you for your time, for your presence, and of course, for looking forward to have you visiting SVYM at the nearest possibility. Thank you so much from all of us. I also take this opportunity to thank all the participants for their engaging conversation today. And we are bringing these conversations every week, every Saturday, same time, 7 to 8 p.m. with more number of resource people and experts sharing their expertise with us. So thank you one and all. Good evening and namaste.
Thank you, Ramesh, and yes, Sudarshan. Thank you for inviting me to this talk. And yes, I will definitely come to SVYM. Thank you so much for all the work that you are also doing in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Swarupa. Thank you, all participants who kept coming. This will also be available later on YouTube, recording of this, slightly edited. In the sense, the first few minutes where we've been silent will be edited. And adding that the next week's conversation won't happen on a Saturday, it will happen on a Thursday. That's the only change that we have. Otherwise, subsequent conversations will all happen on a Saturday. So thank you, Swarupa. Thank you, everyone. And have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.